Okay, our backstage manager, Kevin, has arranged this music for you. You like the music he's playing before each movie? Have you kind of noticed? Give Kevin a hand for the music. And I just wanted to tell Johan something. We were really pleased to bring you in, and the thing that we do that I wish we could do a little longer sometimes, or wish that we could have like a second session somewhere with the guests that we bring in. For instance, we brought Eloise Godet in from France, and I could have listened to her a little longer or had another session somewhere, and we brought Johan in from Sweden, and he is a good, lively guest. But I wanted to tell him, when Roger and I took our grandchildren to Stockholm, it had a big effect on them. Our granddaughter Raven, who now works in LA, really identified with Pippi Longstocking. And Raven was this studious, quiet girl growing up, but what she identified with is Pippi Longstocking's rebellious streak. And so much so that when she was ready to go to college, she wrote her college entrance exam on how Pippi Longstocking influenced her life and the way she saw the world. And I thought, they'll never accept that as an exam, as an essay, and they did. They thought, oh yeah, this is really good. So I went back to read the essay, and Raven was saying how she, for a period of time after we got back from Stockholm, Pippi Longstocking, I don't know if you know this about her, she would not sleep like at the head of the bed with her pillow. She always slept at the foot of the bed. And so Raven started sleeping at the foot of the bed and other things that were just kind of inexplicable to us until I read that college essay. And our grandson, whose name is Emil, E-M-I-L, also was influenced by Emil is a popular character in children's literature in Sweden, and there are all these books about Emil, but Emil is kind of a really naughty boy in Stockholm, and he has a series of misadventures. And I think our Emil had a series of misadventures as well, so that was the influence of Stockholm. I just wanted to share that with Johan, and I guess now the world. We are moving on to our next film, which is one I really was touched that what he saw in this movie. And when Roger saw the movie, we don't have a clip of Roger's review because it was later but we do have Roger's review of the movie in our festival program. And let me get to it. Our next movie is called Moving Midway, and it's a film by Godfrey Cheshire, who is a film critic. Let me read a little bit about Godfrey first before we talk about the film. He's a writer, director, and producer. He's an award-winning film critic, journalist, screenwriter, and filmmaker based in New York City, whose writings on film have appeared in publications including the New York Times, Variety, Newsweek, The Village Voice, Interview, Film Comment, Sight and Sound, and and LA Weekly. He currently writes for RogerEbert.com. His first film as a writer, director, and a documentary titled Moving Midway was named one of the 2008 10 Best Films by LA Weekly and New York Magazine. Roger says, Moving Midway tells 3 stories, each one worthy of a film of its own. It records the journey home to North Carolina of the film critic Godfrey Cheshire and his discovery of his family's secret history. 2, it documents the ordeal of moving a 160-year-old southern plantation house to a new location miles away, not by road, but over land. And 3, it demolishes the myth of the Southern plantation. Movie critics are always asked if they've ever wanted to make a movie of their own. A handful, like Peter Bogdanovich and Rod Lurie, have had success with features. Others, like Todd McCarthy, have made good documentaries. Godfrey Cheshire's first film follows the first rule of both kinds of films. Start with a strong story that you feel a personal connection with. His story grows stronger and the connections deeper. Anyway, on page 48 in our festival program, you'll find the full review that Roger gave, Moving Midway. And I was moved by it, and Godfrey and I were talking at the Los Cabos Film Festival last year, or earlier this year. My timeline is so messed up because I was traveling across the country and out of the country for the whole last year, and I don't remember, it was either last year or this year. But we were talking about Roger's review of Moving Midway, and we were talking about things that were happening in the country. This was even before, you were hearing a lot about policemen shooting unarmed African American men. But we were hearing about some rumblings of things in race relations, and we started talking about a little bit about how race is viewed in the country today, and what someone from outside of the country, if they look at America and what's happening here now, how they would view things. We were also talking about the fact that, I'm of an age where I actually remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I wasn't in the March on Washington, but I marched with him and my father back in the 60s. And so I thought that it was very interesting what you're going to see in this movie, to see it from the point of view of what the word home means to us, what the word plantation means. I have to tell you, when I was growing up, because my family, part of my family is from Georgia, and they had farms down there, and when I went to Georgia, I think it was in 1958, I was very impressed with my cousins because they were so self-sufficient. I grew up in Chicago, sort of a concrete jungle, but we had a front yard and a backyard. But my relatives had land, and we'd go down and chase the chickens, and they had all this land, and they were just so self-sufficient. But they talked about some of the things that happened to them. I had a cousin who, when he came up north, even in the winter, he would never wear a hat. And I asked why, and he said because when he was growing up in the South, he had to tip his hat to someone white, and he never had to take his hat off if it were someone black. He did it anyway, but you had to, or you could get, beat up, thrown in jail, or killed if you didn't. So he said he vowed, and that when someone was approaching, if a white gentleman was approaching a black woman, a lady, that he didn't have to tip his hat. And he said he noticed the inequality, and his way of rebelling against that was never to wear a hat, because he didn't. So there were little things that I would hear about in the family lore as I was growing up. So this movie is not really about that. It's a little bit about it. The other thing in this movie that I found very interesting is that this is the 100th anniversary of Birth of a Nation. And that's one film that Roger and I had debates over. And I have very strong feelings against it. I knew that it is, for its cinematic language and its place in history, what an important film it is. I gotta tell you, it's still something that just sticks in my craw the wrong way. And so even at RogerEbert.com, when it came time to, I won't use the word celebrate, to acknowledge the 100th anniversary of Birth of a Nation, I was pretty conflicted. We ended up not doing a big deal about it. But there is something, I'm still very much of a historian, and I like to make sure that things are acknowledged. And so there's something that I found interesting, because in this film, they talk a little bit about Birth of a Nation and about the connection that our filmmaker's family has to it. It's just a, kind of a sort of a parallel connection. But there are lots of different things about this movie that intrigued me. And I also just got to, it's one of those films where you get to know the people and you start caring about them, and maybe I've gone on too long and on about it, but it's just something that Roger and I had actually discussed this movie. So I like to bring the filmmaker out and welcome him, and he'll be coming back on stage afterwards with me and Matt Zolersi's Godfrey, Cheshire.
Thank you, Chaz. I must say I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm a big fan of this festival from being here only once before, and the reasons I'm so happy about this is that, first of all, this beautiful old theater, I'm not going in order here, but this beautiful old theater is really amazing, and to see my film up here is something that I just can't wait for. The other thing is the audience here. I know that the trailer that they have about the festival is absolutely accurate because I saw it for myself about how passionate people are here about film and this event, and I'm really glad that you're here to share this. And also, this is a film festival started by a film critic and always attended by a lot of film critics. It's sort of a film critic centric festival, and I'm a film critic, so it's particularly good for me to be able to do this, since I know some of my colleagues, critics, are here who haven't seen the film yet, and I'm eager to hear what they have to say about it. The thing about this film is it is my first film. I'm working on some others. This is the only one that's been finished, and it is a documentary, and people ask me what I learned as a critic from making a film, and I point to two or three things. One is I learned what a film is, and that may sound funny, but I realized that I didn't know what a film was. I thought the film was the thing in the can. You shoot it, well, this is before when they had film on celluloid. The thing in the can that's Lawrence of Arabia. That's Taxi Driver, sitting over there in the corner, and then we'll put it up on the screen. But I learned that the thing in the can is what Antonioni once very accurately called an hypothesis of popularity. And I think he's right. I think that the thing in the can is only the hypothesis. The thing itself doesn't exist until it's in front of an audience. And it's that interaction that is literally the film. And I've reflected on this a lot, and it sort of a thing that goes along with this, the second thing that I learned, is that filmmakers do not know what that thing is until it's in front of the audience. They don't know what their film is. They've tried for a certain effect or a whole range of effects, but they don't really know. And I was thinking about this, a friend of mine, great critic and artist, Kit Carson, who passed last year, was telling me right when Moving Midway was about to open in New York, and I was sitting there sort of jittery and having a drink with him, and he was laughing at me, and he said, right across the street there's a hotel where when Bonnie and Clyde was about to come out, I was sitting with Warren Beatty, and he was exactly like you are. He was excited, and he was nervous, and he didn't know what he had. And I was thinking, Warren Beatty didn't know what he had, and it was Bonnie and Clyde? Are you kidding me? I'm not trying to compare me to Warren Beatty or Moving Midway to Bonnie and Clyde, but I do think that this is sort of a general thing of filmmakers not really knowing what they have until it meets the audience. So that was sort of like the second thing I learned. But there's another thing about my film in particular. I thought when I was making it that I knew a little bit more about how Southern audiences might greet it than other audiences, because it's a view of the South and of American history from a Southern perspective. And I spent a lot of time growing up, and then once I started as a critic, writing about how I thought that most views of the South in movies were from outsiders' perspectives. And I wanted to make one that, even though I've been living in New York for many years, is more of a Southern perspective on the Southern subject matter. And because I'm dealing with a lot of history and also mythology, and by the way, I don't use myth in this film as something that is not true, which is what it's sometimes used as, but is something that is an overarching sort of system of belief, that we all inhabit mythologies about the nation, about the world, about whatever, and Southerners have a particular mythology about certain things. So that's the way I was using it. But I do know that these, both the history and the mythologies that I'm touching on are still sort of sensitive subjects. They're sort of emotionally charged. They go back to the Civil War and before, what led to the Civil War, and then what's come after the Civil War, right down until now. So I didn't know what non-Southern audiences would think. I'm glad that I wasn't strung up anywhere. But it's the basis for a very interesting conversation, because I discovered that Southern audiences did really seem to like this film. When I went up north, I got a different perspective, but I felt like the people there were still very connected to this history. You know, they just had a different perspective. But when I went way out west, I realized those people, to them, this stuff about the Old South and the Civil War and that kind of thing is like from a distant culture. It's like from a distant planet almost. They inhabit their own history and mythology of the West and the conquest of the West and what all that means. So these are some of the things that I thought about and that I learned in the journey of making this film, and especially in the journey of presenting the film to people and having conversations about it, because that has been really the big part of the film for me. And I look forward to talking to all of you all about it. The final thing I learned is it's very weird to make a film about your own family. And if any of you are thinking about doing that, I would suggest thinking long and hard. On the other hand, if I'd thought long and hard, I might not have done it. I'm actually glad that this film exists, so maybe it's better to just jump off the cliff once you've made that decision. Anyway, enjoy, and I look forward to talking to you afterwards. Thank you.